The fate of a global war hinged on a secret London proving ground. On June 30, 1915, Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, and Minister of Munitions, David Lloyd George, both future Prime Ministers, arrived at the Talbot facility. They came to witness a miracle machine, one they hoped would shatter the brutal stalemate of the Great War. Before them stood a bizarre American tractor, its wheels replaced by 3 segmented tracks. When the engine roared to life, the machine lurched forward across the uneven terrain. What unfolded next defied all military logic. The front track repeatedly lifted from the ground, the entire tractor rearing upward, then slamming back down with violent force. Officers perched precariously on its platform scrambled, desperately shifting their weight from front to back, struggling to maintain balance. Someone in E-personnel, their uniforms crisp, erupted in uncontrolled laughter. The machine truly pitched and rolled, as if on turbulent waves, despite traversing solid English soil. Churchill and Lloyd George did not share their amusement. For nearly a year, the Western Front had remained an unyielding, bloody deadlock. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers languished in trenches stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Between the opposing lines lay miles of barbed wire, beyond which machine guns stood silent, ready to transform any advance into a meaningless, catastrophic slaughter. The British command was desperate. They sought any means to break the stranglehold of trench warfare. The concept of a land battleship had begun to circulate, yet its precise form remained elusive. Perhaps a heavy, lumbering monster was not the answer. Perhaps a swift, maneuverable land destroyer, armed with a machine gun, could cut through wire, suppress enemy fire, and clear a path for the infantry. This was the role envisioned for the 3-tracked Killen-Strait, recently arrived from distant America. The story of this unconventional machine began across the Atlantic, in Wisconsin. There, engineer William Strait grappled with a problem plaguing every American farmer. The vast fields of the United States were simply too immense for horses or stationary engines. Self-propelled machines were required, capable of dragging heavy plows without sinking into the soft, tilled earth. America, by necessity, became the birthplace of the track-laying tractor. A fierce battle of innovation erupted among designers. By 1916, 29,670 tractors operated across the United States. Just 4 years later, that number surged past 200,000. Over 166 manufacturers vied for dominance, each proposing radical new designs. Strait chose a path he believed most logical. His tractor needed to pull 2 or even 3 14-inch plows simultaneously, demanding maximum traction and unparalleled ground clearance. This civilian innovation, born of agricultural necessity, found itself thrust onto the blood-soaked stage of global conflict. The very principles designed to tame the American prairie were now being scrutinized to conquer the European battlefield. What unseen forces, what desperate gambles, truly shape the future of warfare? The earth swallowed conventional wheels. Tracks offered traction, a relentless grip. But how could a fully tracked machine be steered? This was the fundamental engineering enigma of early 20th century agriculture. An inventor named Strait conceived a radical answer. He envisioned a 3-point tracked tractor. 2 massive tracks propelled the rear, flanking the machine. Ahead, a single, smaller track served as the steering mechanism. Yes, the front wheel was itself a track. The world had never witnessed such a configuration. In 1914, Strait secured a patent for his design. He established the Killen-Strait Manufacturing Company, dedicated to producing these unconventional machines. Two variants emerged from his workshops. The more potent Model 3050 featured a Domon engine, its cylinders measuring 6 by 7 inches, delivering 40 horsepower. The lesser version, the 1530, was equipped with a Waukesha engine, its pistons 4.5 by 5.75 inches, generating 30 horsepower. Both machines proved formidable in plowing, tearing through stubborn soil with ease. Yet, a critical flaw emerged. Steering, the very heart of Strait's innovation, became a debilitating problem. The machines moved, but they refused to turn with any semblance of control. Strait's initial attempt to rectify this involved adding small support wheels to the front track. He believed these would assist in turning, providing the necessary pivot points. The theory, however, dissolved in practice. On firm ground, these ancillary wheels merely skated across the surface, offering no directional assistance. They were inert. On softer terrain, the situation worsened dramatically. The small wheels, instead of guiding, functioned as miniature plows. They dug into the earth, accumulating soil ahead of them, creating an insurmountable resistance. The machine would simply halt, immobilized by its own supposed solution. The designer faced an undeniable truth. These auxiliary wheels were not just useless, they actively sabotaged the machine's operation. Streit retreated to his drafting board, proposing a completely different schema. The front track was now suspended on a vertical kingpin. Steering would be achieved using a long handle could pivot the front section. The idea, on paper, appeared sound, a logical progression of mechanical advantage. Reality, once again, delivered a brutal surprise. Even with the integration of a sophisticated gear mechanism designed to amplify the driver's input, rotating the heavy front track around the axis of its own rollers proved virtually impossible. The sheer force demanded was beyond human capability. Drivers simply lacked the physical strength to manipulate the tiller, rendering the machine effectively unsteerable. The more powerful Killen-Strait 3050 tractor was briefly produced with this intricate yet ultimately failed steering system. It found no market. It offered no viable path forward. The American inventor, facing repeated impasses, chose the path of least resistance. He embraced the simplest technical solution imaginable. The front track was modified to pivot directly around the very axis on which it was suspended. No complex gears, no hydraulic assistance, just a direct mechanical linkage. The driver simply turned a lever, the track shifted its orientation, and the machine. Maneuverability remained far from ideal. Turns were wide, clumsy, and demanded significant space. For an agricultural tractor, primarily designed for straight-line plowing across vast fields, this compromise was deemed acceptable. It moved in straight lines, furrowing the earth. But the cost was control. The cost was precision. This was not elegant engineering. It was a surrender to brute force and mechanical limitation. This final iteration, born of necessity and compromise, raises a piercing question. How many innovations, celebrated for their utility, conceal such fundamental, unresolved flaws beneath their surface? What unseen burdens do these compromises place on the operators? And what systemic inefficiencies ripple outward from these foundational imperfections, shaping the very industries they were meant to revolutionize? The answers often remain buried, just beneath the surface of progress. The American heartland demanded power, not finesse. Farmers tilled vast, unforgiving plains, their machines needing raw, unyielding traction to carve endless furrows. Maneuverability, the quick turns of a racing car, held no value here. Instead, they craved sheer pulling might, an unshakable ability to traverse any terrain. The Killen-Strait tractor, in its brutal simplicity, delivered precisely this. Its base model, the 1530, swiftly became the cornerstone of production. A three-tracked behemoth, its engine sat squarely over the rear drive mechanisms, a heavy, unyielding block of iron. Power flowed exclusively to these two rear tracks. The front track, an anomaly, served only for steering and support, a curious appendage that dictated the machine's peculiar gait. This very design, this skewed distribution of weight and purpose, birthed the infamous rocking motion that would later elicit from British officers during its trials. The center of gravity, stubbornly rearward, turned every minor undulation of the earth into a dramatic event. The front track would either lurch skyward, momentarily losing contact with the ground, or plunge deep into the soil, dragging the machine into an unexpected dip. The tractor truly mimicked a small vessel caught in a tempest, except its waves were sculpted from solid earth, not water. A bizarre spectacle, certainly, for any observer expecting mechanical precision. But how did this agricultural oddity, born of American fields, ever capture the gaze of the British military command? The spring of 1915 had arrived, and with it, a chilling realization. The Western Front was bleeding out. Attempts to breach the German defenses, meticulously planned and brutally executed, dissolved into rivers of blood, one after another. Soldiers marched into the maw of battle, only to be shredded by relentless machine gun fire. They became hopelessly entangled in dense thickets of barbed wire, dying by the thousands, their bodies piled before the enemy trenches they could never reach. Officers, their faces etched with desperation, scoured every avenue, every nascent technology, for a solution to this unfolding nightmare. The existing tools of war were failing. Armored cars, once hailed for their effectiveness in the fluid, open warfare of earlier campaigns, proved utterly useless in this new, scarred landscape. The churned earth, pockmarked by craters and choked with wire, rendered them immobile, vulnerable. Something fundamentally new was required. A machine capable of moving where neither automobile nor horse could survive, let alone advance. The very ground had become the enemy. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, became captivated by a singular, audacious vision: the land battleship. He imagined a colossal, armored leviathan, an unstoppable force that would crawl with slow, inexorable might across any obstacle. It would crush barbed wire under its immense weight, flatten enemy emplacements, and grind through the very fabric of the battlefield. It was a concept born of naval power, transposed onto a landlocked hell. Yet the naval aviators of the Royal Naval Air Service, possessing practical experience with armored vehicles, perceived the problem through a different lens. Their requirement was not for a cumbersome, slow-moving battleship, but for a swift, agile destroyer. A machine capable of punching through enemy lines, eliminating entrenched machine gun nests with surgical precision, and carving vital pathways through the wire for the infantry struggling behind. They sought a smaller, relatively inexpensive, and critically maneuverable solution. This more tactical, pragmatic concept resonated deeply, appearing far more realistic for rapid development and deployment. The desperate urgency propelled British agents into a global search. Their attention gravitated towards American tracked tractors, machines that had already proven their resilience and capability in the most arduous civilian conditions. Several models, representing various designs, were swiftly procured and shipped to England for comparative trials. The Killen-Strait was among them, but it was not alone. What hidden compromises were made? What forgotten warnings ignored? in the frantic scramble to weaponize the tools of peace. The Western Front bled. Trenches stretched for hundreds of miles, a festering wound across Europe. Every advance met an impenetrable wall of mud, machine guns, and, most insidious of all, barbed wire. Millions died in futile charges, trapped and torn. The year was 1915. A solution, any solution, was desperately needed. This was the crucible where the Killen-Strait tractor, an unassuming American machine, arrived. Its design, almost alien, would eventually birth the rhomboid tanks that redefined warfare. But on that sweltering summer day at the Talbot Proving Ground, no one yet grasped the profound implications. They only knew the clock was ticking. The proving ground itself had become a frantic laboratory. Armored car chassis, hastily repurposed, served as platforms for the wildest engineering concepts. Britain's brightest minds converged there. Engineers, their faces grimed with grease and exhaustion. Officers, their eyes still holding the distant horror of the trenches. High-ranking officials, their expressions etched with the crushing weight of national survival. The air crackled with a desperate, almost palpable tension. Every soul present understood the stakes. The war's outcome, the fate of entire nations, hung by a thread. Delay meant thousands more graves dug in the fields of France and Belgium. A working solution, a machine capable of breaking the deadlock, had to emerge, and it had to emerge now. Then the Killen-Strait rolled in. Its appearance drew every eye, a bizarre spectacle even amidst the other strange contraptions undergoing trials that month. Instead of conventional wheels, or even the dual tracks of other experimental vehicles, it sported three distinct caterpillar tracks. An oddity, a mechanical anomaly. Yet its very strangeness offered a flicker of hope. Perhaps this unconventional approach, this radical departure from established norms, held the breakthrough they so desperately sought. Perhaps the answer to the Western Front's intractable problems lay in something utterly, demonstrably different. The tractor was prepared with meticulous haste for its demonstration before the highest command. Fuel lines checked, vital components inspected, a precise test route laid out. June 30th was marked as the day this peculiar American machine would face its judgment. Beyond a mere display of mobility, the military had devised a specific, unforgiving challenge. The primary objective? Barbed wire. Miles of it, laid out in dense, tangled lines, mimicking the nightmarish fortifications on the front. Without a definitive answer to this ubiquitous obstacle, any combat vehicle, no matter its armor or firepower, remained utterly useless. It would simply bog down, a static target for enemy guns. Engineers understood the limitations of brute force. Barbed wire possessed a malevolent cunning. It did not simply snap under pressure. It stretched, it tightened, it coiled, ensnaring anything that dared to push through its thorny embrace. A new approach was required, not brute pushing, but surgical cutting. Lieutenant Oliver Thornycroft, a naval officer with extensive experience at sea, stepped forward to tackle this specific problem. His solution was an unexpected transfer of technology. He recalled the torpedo net cutters, formidable blades mounted on destroyers to sever underwater obstructions and protect against subsurface threats. These robust knives, extending from the ship's bow on long tubes, sliced through anything in their path. Why not apply the same principle to land? The idea was audacious, yet elegantly simple. Thornycroft ordered 2 such cutters salvaged from a decommissioned destroyer. They were then crudely, yet effectively, affixed to 2 long metal pipes extending from the front of the Killen-Strait. The resulting apparatus resembled nothing so much as a giant insect's antennae, menacing and sharp. The machine was now ready for the definitive test. The morning of June 30th dawned, heavy with anticipation. The distinguished guests arrived at the proving ground, their presence a stark reminder of the immense power they wielded, the decisions that could alter the trajectory of the war itself. Their verdict would determine if this strange, three-tracked contraption, now bristling with salvaged naval blades, held the key to unlocking the trenches, or if it was merely another desperate, futile experiment in a war that consumed everything. What other desperate innovations, born of such terrifying necessity, still lie buried in the archives, their true impact on the world yet to be fully understood? Winston Churchill stepped from the automobile, his gaze sweeping over the assembled machinery. Beside him stood David Lloyd George, a man destined, within a single year, to become Prime Minister, guiding Britain through the war's most brutal months. Both men understood the escalating cost of every lost day, the unforgiving arithmetic of a conflict consuming an entire generation. The German army dug deeper, its defensive lines hardening into an impenetrable steel and concrete labyrinth. Meanwhile, British generals, clinging to obsolete doctrine, continued to hurl waves of young men into the meat grinder of frontal assaults, a senseless sacrifice against fixed positions. The trenches, once temporary fortifications, had become permanent graves. Officers from the Royal Naval Air Service began their demonstration. Their subject? An American agricultural tractor, repurposed, reimagined. A mechanic engaged the ignition. The 40-horsepower Doman engine roared to life, its guttural rumble echoing across the proving ground, a sound alien to the quiet fields it was designed to cultivate. The Kilbourne tractor lurched forward. Immediately, its profound difference from any conventional vehicle became starkly apparent. This was no ordinary machine. Its wide tracks clawed at the churned earth, gripping the loose soil with surprising tenacity, refusing to bog down. Its pace remained slow, deliberate. Yet for a piece of farming equipment hastily adapted for warfare, the movement seemed adequate. Then the ground shifted. The tractor encountered its first significant undulation. The front track bucked violently, launching the machine's nose skyward. For a terrifying moment, it hung suspended, an iron beast defying gravity, before crashing back down with a jarring impact. The officers, perched precariously on its platform, struggled to maintain their footing. One of them let out a bark of laughter, shouting something about a storm at sea. The tractor's motion, indeed, mimicked the violent pitching of a small warship caught in heavy swells. The rear tracks, bearing the concentrated mass of the engine and the primary structure, maintained unwavering contact with the ground. The front track, however, behaved with startling unpredictability, a rogue limb. A naval officer, observing the chaotic dance, proposed a desperate improvisation. Could the machine's center of gravity be controlled by shifting weight across its platform? Several officers began to scramble, running from the rear of the machine to the front, and then back again. The effect was immediate, profound, and entirely unexpected. When the men clustered at the rear, the front track remained almost perpetually airborne, the tractor rearing its nose, moving solely on its two hind tracks. Conversely, when the officers rushed forward, even leaning precariously over the platform's edge, the front track pressed firmly into the earth, while the machine's rear section lifted slightly, a bizarre mechanical curtsy. Churchill watched this spectacle, his face an unreadable mask. He required a combat vehicle, an instrument of war, not a crude circus attraction. Yet the tractor's raw off-road capability was undeniably impressive. It scaled steep inclines with an almost unnatural ease, descended into shallow craters without hesitation, and, despite its bulk, could pivot within a surprisingly confined space. Its maneuverability, it was true, left much to be desired. Its turns were wide, sweeping arcs. But for a machine designed to plow fields, such limitations were perhaps to be expected. Lloyd George, meanwhile, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, exchanging hushed words with the officers. Perhaps, he mused, this strange, ungainly contraption, born of desperation and improvisation, still held a viable future. Perhaps such a rapid, relatively lightweight apparatus, despite its inherent flaws and the bizarre spectacle of its demonstration, offered a glimmer of hope against the entrenched horrors of the Western Front. But at what true cost, measured not in shillings or steel, but in the relentless, unyielding attrition of human lives, would such a crude solution finally be deemed acceptable? And what deeper systemic failures did this desperate improvisation truly expose? The Western Front, a landscape of perpetual, agonizing stalemate. For 4 brutal years, an unseen enemy, deceptively simple yet lethally effective, had choked every advance, swallowed every offensive. Barbed wire. Miles upon miles of it, cheap, ubiquitous, and responsible for an incomprehensible tally of human lives. It was not the machine guns, not the artillery, but this humble, twisted steel that turned the Great War into an unending, futile slaughter. Now, a desperate gamble emerged. A machine, a land destroyer, engineered to rip through the very fabric of that deadlock. This was the moment of reckoning. The Killen-Strait tractor, a crude, armored behemoth, was positioned before the first line of wire entanglements. It was precisely the same kind of obstacle that stretched for hundreds of kilometers across the entire Western Front. Simple strands stretched taut between wooden stakes. A barrier that had halted millions, transforming charges into massacres long before soldiers could even glimpse enemy trenches. If this mechanical beast could conquer this insidious barrier, it would earn its right to exist. If it failed, it would join the forgotten graveyard of countless other desperate, failed experiments. The engine roared. The tractor lurched forward, crashing into the wire. For a few agonizing seconds, a flicker of hope ignited. The machine continued its relentless push, the wire tightening, the stakes groaning, bending under the immense strain. Then, the inevitable, the feared, materialized. The wire did not snap. It held. Far stronger than any had anticipated, it refused to yield. Instead of breaking, it began to constrict. It coiled around the tracks of the Killen-Strait, a metallic serpent slowly strangling its prey. The tractor, a testament to raw, stubborn will, continued to crawl forward, but with each meter, its progress became more agonizingly slow. The wire wrapped itself around the tracks, snagged on every protruding part of the chassis, transforming into a dense, impenetrable cocoon around the struggling machine. Within a single minute, the tractor ground to a halt. It was hopelessly ensnared, held captive by the very obstacle it was designed to obliterate. The wire now gripped it tighter than any chain. The officers exchanged grim glances, a complete, unequivocal failure. All the engineering ingenuity, the powerful engine, the sturdy tracks, all of it rendered utterly useless against the implacable, elastic strength of steel wire. A significant amount of time was then wasted, a stark testament to the wire's grip, to free the tractor from its metallic prison. Mechanics, cursing and burning their hands on the razor-sharp barbs, painstakingly cut the wire with pliers, unwinding it from the tracks. Once the machine was finally liberated, The stage was set for the invention of Lieutenant Thornycroft. Specialized wire cutters, designed to sever the enemy's thorny embrace, were securely mounted on long pipes, extending menacingly forward just ahead of the front tracks. The sight was formidable. Two sharp blades protruded, poised to cleave through any obstruction in the machine's path. A fresh line of barbed wire was strung, meticulously positioned at the exact height of the cutting edges. The tractor advanced once more. This time, the outcome was starkly different. The cutters engaged the wire. A metallic shriek ripped through the air as the strands shattered into fragments. The Killen-Strait passed through the entanglement as if it simply did not exist. A palpable wave of relief, of renewed purpose, swept through the observing officers. This was it, the solution. Winston Churchill leaned towards David Lloyd George, a low murmur passing between them. Success, it seemed, was within their grasp. Yet the seasoned military engineers understood a chilling truth. This was only half the test. On the actual battlefield, wire was rarely strung with such pristine, uniform precision. It lay in tangled, chaotic masses, draped over craters, hidden in shell holes, a three-dimensional labyrinth of death. What other unforeseen complexities, what other layers of brutal reality lay hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly simple triumph? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent prelude to the systemic horrors that innovation, however brilliant, could never fully outrun. The wire hung loose, a chaotic tangle between the posts, forming an unpredictable web at varying heights. This was the latest configuration, a desperate attempt to break the deadlock of the Western Front. For this new trial, the steel strands were secured differently, deliberately allowed to sag and sway, mimicking the brutal reality of a battlefield obstacle. The stakes were immense, the pressure palpable. The Killen-Strait tractor, a hulking American import, lumbered forward for its third assault on the barrier. Its purpose, to prove itself a wire breaker, a machine that could carve paths through the deadliest defenses. The cutting blades engaged, tearing into the steel. But the slack wire simply yielded, deflecting around the sharpened edges, wrapping itself around the very tools designed to sever it. The tractor pressed on, a mechanical beast oblivious to its own futility. The wire, in turn, began to tighten, coiling relentlessly around the massive tracks. The cutters, once hailed as a revolutionary solution, proved utterly useless against this fluid, yielding obstacle. The machine, a symbol of Allied hope, ground to a halt once more, hopelessly ensnared in steel tendrils. The test had failed. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, departed the proving ground, his disappointment a heavy cloak. The Killen-Strait had not fulfilled the primary mission for which it had been brought across an ocean. It was no wire breaker. As a frontline combat machine, it was deemed worthless. Yet, not every officer shared the First Lord's crushing pessimism. Lieutenant Symes, an engineer with the Royal Naval Air Service, remained on the desolate testing ground. He circled the American tractor, his gaze distant, pondering the machine's undeniable power. The tractor had demonstrated exceptional cross-country mobility. Its 3 tracks maintained an unwavering grip on the treacherous terrain, even across the most challenging sections. Perhaps, Symes mused, the flaw lay not with the tractor itself, but with the very nature of the task assigned to it. Symes stopped, surveying the barren landscape. Scattered across the site stood several armored cars, decommissioned relics of forgotten battles, pulled from service in the muddy fields of France and Belgium. Among them, a French Delaunay-Belleville armored car, its chassis scarred, its armor pockmarked with bullet holes, yet still a potential source of salvaged components. The lieutenant approached the battle-worn vehicle, his eyes meticulously tracing the contours of its armored shell. The steel plates, a quarter-inch thick, offered decent protection against bullets and shrapnel. It was in that precise moment, amidst the wreckage of failed ambition, that a revelation ignited within the officer's mind. What if the objective shifted? Instead of forcing the tractor to become a wire breaker, what if they transformed it into an armored battlefield hauler? A machine designed not for the initial assault, but for the relentless, brutal logistics behind it. Such a vehicle could deliver vital ammunition to advancing troops, evacuate the wounded from the inferno, or tow heavy artillery pieces under the constant threat of enemy fire. The concept resonated with a cold, logical practicality. The Killen-Strait had been engineered as a traction engine, built to pull heavy plows. Its very design, therefore, was inherently suited for immense, sustained loads. Its 40-horsepower engine delivered ample power to traverse unforgiving terrain, even with significant cargo. The unique three-track system provided both stability and unparalleled mobility. Why not protect its crew with armor and deploy this robust machine in the rear echelon of advancing forces, a lifeline amidst the chaos? Symes presented his radical vision to command. His proposal, born from the ashes of failure, was met with unexpected interest. A gamble was approved. Work began immediately, a desperate race against the relentless clock of war. Mechanics descended upon the French armored car, meticulously stripping its armored shell. Each steel plate was carefully removed, every rivet preserved, ensuring no damage to the precious metal or its fastenings. Simultaneously, engineers toiled over blueprints, performing complex calculations. The tractor's combat weight, unarmored, stood at 5,000 kilograms. The Delaunay-Belleville's armored body weighed approximately 1 ton. The numbers began to coalesce, hinting at a new, unforeseen potential. But what other hidden capabilities, what other desperate adaptations lay dormant within the machines of war, waiting for a single, unconventional mind to unlock their true, terrifying purpose? How many more failures would it take before the true nature of modern combat was finally understood? The total mass would swell to 6 tons. A 40-horsepower engine, in theory, might manage such a burden, yet its power reserve dwindled to a perilous minimum. This razor-thin margin, a gamble on the battlefield, whispered of an impending catastrophe. The most contentious element proved to be the turret. The Dillon-Belleville armored car, a contemporary design, mounted a rotating turret armed with a Maxim machine gun, precisely 7.71 millimeters in caliber. Integrating an identical turret onto this tractor promised to transform it into a full-fledged combat vehicle, capable not only of hauling essential supplies, but also of delivering crucial fire support to advancing infantry. The vision was compelling, almost irresistible. Engineers, however, swiftly confronted an insurmountable truth. The Killen-Strait tractor was already an inherently unstable machine, plagued by an alarmingly high center of gravity. Its entire engine mass and structural bulk were concentrated at the rear, causing the front track to perpetually lose contact with the ground. This fundamental design flaw made it a precarious platform even before modifications. Mounting a heavy turret at the highest point of the chassis would irrevocably shatter an already fragile equilibrium. Imagine the scene: a tractor lurching across uneven terrain. Its front section pitches violently upwards, then slams back down, a relentless, jarring motion. Perched almost 3 meters above the ground, a turret, complete with a machine gun and its exposed operator, would sway precariously. The first abrupt movement, the slightest jolt, would inevitably send the entire contraption toppling onto its side. It was a death trap waiting to happen. The engineers, acutely aware of this grim reality, understood the implications. The dream of converting the tractor into a potent combat machine had to be abandoned. The turret was scrapped. The project scaled back, focusing solely on rudimentary armor plating for the hull, intended to offer minimal protection for the crew and their precious cargo. The compromise was stark. Ambition yielded to the cold logic of physics. The installation of this armor consumed several days. Steel plates were crudely bolted to the tractor's frame, forming a cramped, protected space for a crew of 2 to 3. The result was a bizarre, almost grotesque construct. A low-slung, irregularly shaped armored body rose awkwardly above its 3 tracks. The front track, with its steering mechanism, remained exposed, a glaring vulnerability. At the rear, 2 wide, cumbersome tracks dominated the profile. The machine's aesthetic was far from elegant, an industrial monstrosity, yet military strategists seemed unconcerned. Their singular focus remained on functionality, movement, and crew protection, no matter the cost to form or efficiency. With the modifications complete, new trials commenced. A mechanic climbed into the armored cabin, a space now even more confined and claustrophobic. He engaged the engine, a strained roar filling the air, and attempted to move. The tractor lurched, its tracks churning, but the machine barely stirred. The additional ton of armor had transformed the relatively nimble Killen-Strait into a sluggish, unwieldy behemoth. The 40 horsepower, once theoretically adequate, proved catastrophically insufficient. The engine screamed at its absolute limits, yet the vehicle's progress was reduced to a glacial crawl, a turtle's pace in a desperate race. Terrain that the tractor had previously navigated with ease and confidence now became an insurmountable obstacle. The armored Killen-Strait struggled to ascend a small incline it had once conquered effortlessly. On soft ground, its tracks began to slip and churn, bogging down where it had once traversed playfully. Its already unimpressive maneuverability deteriorated further, becoming utterly dire. Turning required immense physical effort from the driver, a brutal wrestling match with the controls. The turning radius, a critical metric in any combat scenario, had doubled, rendering the machine almost useless in tight spaces. What unseen forces, what bureaucratic pressures, allowed such a fundamentally flawed design to progress so far, consuming precious resources and lives only to reveal its inherent futility? The officers watched, their faces etched with a grim understanding. The experiment was collapsing before their eyes. Hauling a shell of steel across a ravaged landscape proved fundamentally different from pulling a plow through tilled soil. For several agonizing days, the machine was driven across the proving ground, a desperate search for purpose in its lumbering form. Engineers tested its capacity to tow heavy loads, to surmount various obstacles, to navigate diverse terrains. Each trial delivered the same verdict. The armored tractor, a brute force concept, proved too slow, too voracious in its fuel consumption, too inherently unreliable for the front lines. Its armor offered protection, a cold comfort. Yet that protection was meaningless if the machine could not reach its objective. It snagged on the first challenging rise. It bogged down in the churned earth. An enemy artillery battery would have ample time to zero in, calmly dismantling a stationary target. The military command delivered its final, unequivocal judgment. Deploying the armored Killen-Strait to France was deemed illogical. It had failed to meet expectations, neither as a wire cutter nor as an armored hauler. The machine was too specialized, too temperamental, too constrained in its capabilities. Its 40-horsepower engine, perfectly adequate for agricultural tasks, was catastrophically insufficient for propelling an armored combat vehicle across a battlefield cratered by high explosives. The failed experiment demanded resolution. The armored tractor stood abandoned on the Talbot Proving Ground, a monument to miscalculation. No one seemed to know its fate. Scrapping it felt wasteful. The machine, for all its flaws, still functioned. Its military aspirations, however, were dead. A solution, unexpected and almost ironic, materialized with surprising speed. The Royal Naval Air Service, a burgeoning force, desperately needed ground traction for its colossal airships. These immense aerial leviathans, fragile giants of the sky, required powerful tugs to maneuver them out of their hangars and across sprawling airfields. In September of 1915, the strange machine arrived at the airship station in Barrow-in-Furness. This town on England's northwest coast became the final port for an ambitious, if misguided, project. Here, the Killen-Strait finally found its true calling. The very slowness that rendered it useless on the battlefield became an indispensable asset when handling airships. The deliberate, cautious movement of these gargantuan aircraft demanded precisely this kind of unhurried power. The tractor's robust off-road capability allowed it to operate on the often sodden airfield ground, regardless of the weather. Historians still debate the fate of its armor. Did the steel carapace remain, or was it stripped away before its journey to Barrow? Definitive documentation, it seems, has vanished. It is entirely plausible the armor was removed at the proving ground, restoring the tractor's original silhouette and a measure of its lost agility. Or perhaps it toiled for several years in its armored guise, its bizarre appearance a constant source of quiet dread among newly recruited air service personnel. What other grand failures, deemed too costly to discard, too useless for their original purpose, lie repurposed and forgotten within the hidden machinery of state? The truth of its ultimate failure we will never truly know. The British War Department, undeterred by early missteps, acquired several more Killen-Strait machines. This time, no grand experiments with bolted-on armor. Their purpose was starkly practical. The battlefields of France were not paved roads. They were quagmires of mud, cratered earth, and shattered infrastructure. Artillery pieces weighing tons sank. Supply trucks became immobile monuments to futility. The Killen-Strait, with its distinctive three-track system, became an unsung workhorse, dragging heavy guns, recovering mired vehicles, aiding in the construction of front-line fortifications. A quiet, relentless contribution, devoid of glory or headlines, yet absolutely indispensable to the grinding machinery of war. But as the Killen-Strait toiled in the mud, another American import was undergoing trials. On that very same day, at the Talbot Proving Grounds, mere yards from where the Killen-Strait had once been considered for armor, the creeping grip tractor was revealing a different future. Its revolutionary track system, robust and adaptable, would become the foundational blueprint. Within 12 months, that design would manifest as the rhomboid silhouette of the Mark I tank, a weapon poised to shatter the stalemate of trench warfare, to redefine the very nature of conflict. The Killen-Strait, a machine almost a tank, faded into a curious footnote. It was an implement of peace, briefly repurposed for war, then returned to its humble, vital work. It taught engineers a brutal lesson. Merely grafting steel onto a farm implement creates only a heavier farm implement, not a war machine. A truth learned at immense cost. How many other crucial innovations, born in the same crucible of necessity, were overlooked, their transformative power dismissed, leaving us forever blind to the roads not taken, the conflicts prolonged, the lives needlessly lost.